Hi guys, this is Mike from Ham Radio Science. If you keep up with these kind of things, about a month ago, Apple introduced a new series of computers using their new M1 chips. The reviews of the M1 chips were generally very positive and showed that these chipsets were outperforming chipsets such as the Core i9s and AMD's higher-end processors. So I was curious about the lowest cost unit that was released, the Mac Mini M1, just to see how well it would perform as a ham shack computer. And one of the attractions of this particular model is that it runs only $700. The base model comes with 8 gigabytes of internal memory and 256 gigabytes of SSD storage. After testing it in the shack for about 3 weeks, the claims are true. This little computer can compete very well with other computers that run $2,000 or $3,000. Also, one of the super nice features of the Mac Mini is that it runs cool and quiet under load, so you don't get noisy fans. On the back of the Mac Mini, you'll find an Ethernet connector. It also has 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports. Now, if you're not familiar with Thunderbolt 3, you can use these as standard USB ports, like connecting drives and so forth. You can connect monitors to these ports. You can connect a breakout box that will give you more USB ports. So it's a very versatile connector. You also have an HDMI 2.0 port, which will support monitors up to 4K. Now on the Mac Mini, you can connect only 2 monitors. Now you can do this by connecting the monitor to the HDMI port up to 4K, and the second monitor you can connect to the Type-C port up to 6K. Now if you want to, you can just use the Type-C connectors using the appropriate cables. On the Type-C connectors, you can connect your monitor via a Type-C to Type-C cable, a Type-C to HDMI cable, or a Type-C to DisplayPort cable. There's also 2 USB 3.1 Gen 2 connectors on the back of the Mini. This is where you could connect your hard drive, or you could connect your mouse or keyboard or any other USB device. And then finally we have a headphone jack, which you can use to connect up your headphones or external speakers. As I mentioned a little earlier, the M1 Mac Mini has been outperforming computers that cost a good bit more, as well as hanging in with the i9 type chipsets and some of the higher end AMD chipsets. The PC behind the Mac Mini is my gaming PC. This PC is relatively well spec'd out. It may not be the most top end, but is a pretty competent machine. So I thought I would test the Mini against the PC with a benchmark test and a test of exporting some 4K video. Here's the Mac Mini's basic specs. You see that it's a little different from what we will normally see with a PC, especially with the 8 gigabyte unified memory. This memory works a little bit different than on a PC, so actually it's plenty for the Mac Mini. You can also get this machine in 16 gigabytes, but the jury's a little bit out whether it really makes that big a difference or not. Taking a look at the Cinebench test for the M1 versus the gaming PC, you'll see that the gaming PC totally smashes the Mac Mini in multi-core performance. Now, in single-core performance, it's a different story. You'll see that the Mac Mini outperforms the gaming PC in single-core performance. Now, this is pretty important because a great deal of the software we use is very lightly threaded and depends on that single core to operate, which, having a faster single core speed, the programs operate a lot more snappy. Now, this is where the benchmarks don't always tell the whole story. This is an export of a 3-minute video using DaVinci Resolve Beta on both the PC and the Mac. Now, the DaVinci Resolve Beta for the Mac Mini M1 is an optimized version of that software. So you can see that the PC gets handily trashed here by being able to export this timeline of 4K video in about half the time. Now, to be completely fair, the gaming PC with its external graphics card really outperforms handily the Mac Mini M1 when it comes to AAA gaming. Now, the Mac Mini's GPU is perfectly adequate for most things, but gaming, not so much. Okay, let's talk a couple minutes about what makes the M1 so powerful. I bought my first PC back in 1977, which was a TRS-80, and nothing much has changed since then. We still have computers that have a motherboard and separate components that are scattered along that motherboard. And this is a very inefficient way of building a computer. Not to mention the typical computer needs to be cooled off, and they're hot, and their fans are noisy, and also they draw a lot of power. For many, many years, Apple used Intel processors in their computers, but over the last few years, Intel has been very slow in improving the performance of their Intel chips and was holding Apple back. For about 7 years, Apple has been putting ARM-based processors in their phones and in the iPads. And the benefits of these processors were that they were fast, they didn't take much power, and they ran very cool. So you can see that in Apple's M1 chips, they were able to shrink the entire computer down into one 7 nanometer chip. The main benefit of this allows the computer to operate far more efficiently than the standard processors that we have today. This design allows the processor to also be able to run very cool and use a lot less power. Let's talk about using ham radio software on the M1 Mac Mini. There are basically three types of programs that you can run on the M1 Mac Mini. The best ones are going to be the M1 optimized programs, which are coded to be very efficient and very fast on the M1 chips. However, you might find some of your favorite Mac programs for ham radio have not been translated to the M1 code yet. And that's not a big problem because Apple has accounted for that with a piece of software called Rosetta 2. When you first time you run a x86 program, Rosetta 2 will convert it to M1 code, and it seems to work pretty well. It's even a little faster once this is done. What's also pretty cool is that you can run your iPad and iPhone apps on your M1 Mac Mini. Of course, this is true with all the M1 processors, but it's very cool because it gives you access to a library of other applications that you can use on the machine. If you go to Apple's App Store, you'll notice that there's been quite a few applications for Mac that have already been converted to work with the more efficient M1 code. Now, going to the ham radio section of the App Store and looking at the ham radio applications, I would tell you to check with the developer first before you buy one of these programs to see if it does run on the M1 Mac. Now, regarding the iPhone and iPad apps, I would give you the same advice. Check with the developer or check in the description to see if these are also M1 compatible. I've found that a good number of them will work. You may run into problems with the UI or maybe some other funny problems where it just doesn't run. So check it out first before you buy anything. I did spend some time testing out some ham radio applications for the Mac, and as I expected, most of them worked pretty well. Of course, Smart SDR for macOS works fantastic on this Mac M1, so I would highly recommend that combination if you're interested in getting involved in the Mac and have a Flex radio. Now, from here on out, you're going to hear me mention the word seem to because I did test a lot of these programs, but I didn't test every little thing, so there might be some gotchas in there. I tested out Rumlog NG, and it seemed to work just fine. I didn't delve into all the little details, but on the surface, it looked like it was going to be okay. I'm not sure if Rumlog NG has been optimized for the Mac, but if it's running well under the Rosetta conversion. If you're a user of the Dog Park Software Mac applications, It looks like that the author has gone ahead and converted these to be compatible with the M1 processor. For fun, I tried running some of the iPad and iPhone apps alongside of a main program like Smart SDR for macOS, and actually it works pretty well. Now, again, all iPad apps or iPhone apps are not going to always work great. You're going to run into some problems like with the user interface and possibly them just crashing, but I think a good number of them will work okay. Okay, let's discuss a potential deal breaker for using a M1 Mac in your ham shack. A lot of ham radio software is based in Windows. With the M1 Macs, you lose the ability to run Windows under Boot Camp, as well as running Windows under VM software like VMware and Parallels. On the Intel Macs, this was always a nice feature to have to be able to run both Windows and OS X. However, help might be right around the corner. Parallels just recently released a technical preview of their new Parallel software for the M1 chip. Now, this is all pretty beta, but you can sign up and be able to download the Parallel software. Parallels also requires that you download the ARM version of Windows 10. You can download the Windows 10 ARM64 operating system by subscribing to the Windows Insider Preview program. Now, this is free to do that. You just have to set up a Microsoft account and log in using the Microsoft account to the Windows Insider program. At the time of this video, both the Parallels program and the Windows ARM64 operating system is being updated on a fairly regular basis at this point. One tip is once you have Parallels and the ARM64 operating system installed, go to the Windows settings and switch from the beta channel to the dev channel. That way you'll get brand new updates for the ARM64 software. If you need a little help getting this set up, you can check out YouTube. There are several videos that go into detail as how to get this all working. And I would also recommend that if you're going to try this is to subscribe to the Parallels forums for the M1 version of Parallels. There's a lot of help and extra information there. Now, setting this up was actually very easy, and once I did get it going, I was pretty surprised at how fast that it will load up. So I went ahead and did some testing of some of the common or somewhat popular ham radio programs just for fun to see how well they would work or not work. And it was sort of a mixed bag, but most of them worked pretty well. I tested several programs like logging programs, and here again the key word is they seem to work just fine. Where the problems started to occur was with programs that needed special drivers. For example, I couldn't get Smart SDR for Windows running because every time I started it, I would get a DAX error. The error was related to the virtual COM ports that DAX tries to create, and I found out that other virtual serial port software won't work either. One radio I couldn't get this working with was the SDR Play series. The problem seems to be again with the drivers. When you start SDR Uno, you get an error message saying no RSPs found. Now, this is not an uncommon error message with SDR Play radios. It happens on regular Windows installations also, and it's a kind of a mysterious error that takes a good bit of troubleshooting to fix anyway. But then again, the SDR Uno software seemed to work just fine playing back a IQ file. SDR Uno, just like most of the other software that I tested, actually was pretty snappy running under this Windows 10 ARM environment. Another device that I could not get to work was the RTL SDR stick. Again, this was a driver issue. The RTL Zadig drivers just would not install. And here again, just like SDR Play's SDR Uno software, HD SDR seemed to run fine. So if you could get something connected to it, it would probably work. I also tried installing the drivers for my Yaesu FT991A. And of course, the CP10 drivers just did not want to install automatically, so I wound up having to go back into the device manager and installing the drivers manually. And at that point, they started to work. I was able to get Ham Radio Deluxe to run, and by the way, that is not sped up. That is the real-time load times with this system. Ham Radio Deluxe seemed to work just fine and did control the radio correctly. I also tried out Yaesu Suite, and it seemed to work just fine. All the controls seemed to work, and there was no problem with it communicating with the radio. After having some success with connecting the FT9918 to the Mac Mini running Parallels, running ARM64 Windows 10, I thought I would try for a full FT8 setup. And somewhat to my surprise, it seemed to work perfectly. You see we have WSJT-X and Grid Tracker all running together for a pretty much standard FT8 setup. So it looks like there is some promise for the Mac M1 to be able to run amateur radio software in the future. The Parallels and the Windows 10 ARM64 combo seems to be headed in the right direction. On a side note, Apple introduced two M1 MacBooks, the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro 13. All Apple's M1 machines compare pretty closely to one another in performance. There is some small differences between each model. The MacBook Air is the least expensive laptop in the line, and it comes in around $999, which makes it the most powerful laptop you can buy at this time for under $1,000. The MacBook Pro is the step-up model in the M1 laptop line, and it gives you a little better screen and a little better performance. But on both these laptops, what's kind of interesting is that the battery life is extremely long. The MacBook Air clocks in around 18 hours and the MacBook Pro 13 at 20 hours. So if you're looking for a laptop to use out in the field, you definitely want to check one of these out. The long battery life is going to be a huge benefit, as well as the build quality on these laptops are very sturdy with their aluminum frames, compared to most PC laptops, which are mainly plastic. Should you buy the M1 Mac Mini as your Ham Shack computer? Well, let's take a look at some of the pros and cons of the Mac Mini. The strongest points for buying the Mac Mini is its price at $699. Also, it would be hard to find a PC that performs as well as the Mac Mini does at the $699 price point. To get to that same price performance, you would probably have to buy a PC that costs 2 to 3 times more than the M1 Mac Mini. Also, the very small footprint makes it easy to place on your desktop without taking up a whole lot of space. And one of my favorite features is that the Mac Mini is very, very quiet, which is very nice. It also runs very cool too, which is nice not to have that extra heat coming out into the Ham Shack. If you're already a Macintosh user and your computer's getting a little old and a little slow, you might want to consider this M1 Mac Mini as an inexpensive replacement or addition to your computer equipment. There are a couple reasons I wouldn't suggest that you buy the M1 Mac Mini, and that is, for right now, if your Ham apps are all based in Windows, it would probably be best to wait and see how the VM and ARM-based Windows 10 works out, since it's still under development at this time. Hey guys, if you found this video useful, please take a second and give us a like, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We'll have some more videos coming up in the very near future, and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.